Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon to never miss an update from RAU'S.
Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper analysis from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to discuss Delhi edition of The Hindu newspaper dated 6th of December 2020. The articles which we are going to discuss today are displayed on your screen. Let us now begin the discussion.
Dear students, RAU'S Prelims Test Series 2021 is a complete testing and revision course for the upcoming prelims examination. The program will help you prepare for UPSC prelims through a step-up approach. It is a meticulously designed study plan to organize your preparation and keep you on track towards covering the prelims GS and CSAT syllabus extensively from NCERT to the advanced level. The goal of our Prelims Test Series 2021 program is to exhaustively cover all standard sources of study material, including NCERT, with a study plan to test you at par with UPSC level of questions, thereby improving your chances of clearing the prelims examination. To give multiple revision of the entire syllabus from the perspective of civil service prelims pattern. The test series program will also give you the final revision of all topics and themes before the examination through QIP videos and prelims compass notes. The QIP videos or Quality Improvement Program videos are for speedy revision of all important topics for the upcoming prelims examination. QIP videos are kind of crash course for the prelims examination. And prelims compass are 8 subject-wise prelims compilation of all static and current affair topics important for the upcoming prelims. RAU'S Prelims Test Series 2021 will include topics test, testing the concept of candidate. It will include thematic test on both the concept and the current affair of that particular theme. It will also include current affair tests covering the monthly current affairs. And there will be full-length test before the final exam to simulate you for the D-Day. There is a link in the description of this video. You can click on the link for registration and to also check out the demo QIP videos.
Let us begin the discussion by first having a look at Let us begin the discussion by having a look at a few of the statements which you have to learn yourself whether there. Let us begin the discussion by first having a look at few statements which you will find out through this discussion whether they are true or false. Five Eye Alliance is a group of countries committed against blindness. Iran is not part of OIC, but Palestine is. There are no members of OIC from Americas. All members of OIC have Muslim heads of the state. A qubit or quantum bit is the basic unit of quantum information, the quantum version of the classical binary bit physically realized with a two-state device. Food Safety and Standard Act 2006 led to the establishment of FSSAI. Honey contains antioxidants and amino acids. Herd immunity occurs when more than 50% of the community is immune to a disease, either through vaccination or through prior illness, making the spread of this disease from person to person unlikely. The answers to these statements are given towards the end of the discussion. So the first news which we have taken for today's discussion is how Australia-China ties hit a new low, which appears on page number 9, the international page. Now there are a series of development over a period of 2 to 3 years which indicate a rapidly declining relationship between Australia and China. This decline in relationship is not just limited to strategic sphere, but it also extends into trade, business, as well as the federal relation of Australia. Now, if you talk about just the last month, there have been a very high level exchanges, intergovernmental exchanges between Australia and China, which have been quite acrimonious. For example, take this. The high-profile Chinese diplomat Mr. Zhao Lijian posted an image on his official Twitter account which showed an Australian soldier holding a knife to the throat of an Afghan child. Of course, this image was doctored, but so far this image and this tweet has not been retracted by the diplomat. Let's go back 2 weeks from then. Chinese government published a 14-point dossier in prominent national Australian daily newspapers, which was meant to let the Australian people know about what Australian government is doing. And these set of 14 points, if you read them, are nothing less than threats. They include points related to trade, related to sovereignty, and it is more or less like a ransom demand put publicly. Now, this is a watershed moment because generally such kinds of demands are quite secret, are told directly to the top officials in the government, but in this case, Chinese publicly published these demands in front of the people as in advertisements in prominent daily newspapers. So, of course, this indicates quite rapid decline in the relationship between Australia and China. If you remember, whenever we talk about Quad, so far the weakest link has been Australia itself because US, India and Japan have been quite vociferous in their opposition to China. But so far, because of Australia's grave dependence on China, especially in matters of trade, Australia was not open about its criticism. But in last 2 to 3 years, we will see those sequence of events which have led to the worsening of relationship. Of course, this is quite a good news for India because Australia not only is a developed country, but is also storehouse of some of the most important natural resources. So let us see how the things have escalated in last 2 to 3 years. So the first instance from where, or the first action from where the relationship actually dipped was the blacklisting of Chinese companies Huawei and ZTE from being involved in the rollout of 5G networks in Australia, and this was back in 2018. Of course, we know that Australia was not the only country to blacklist Huawei because across the globe, there was an apprehension or the concern regarding the security implications of 5G instruments being developed by Huawei, and so not just Australia but many other countries banned it. But since Australia and China have traditionally shared good relations, China was taken aback with this particular decision. Then in the same year, that is again in 2018, Australia passed a new foreign interference law that was widely seen as aimed against China. Now, the law criminalizes covert, deceptive or threatening actions that are intended to interfere with democratic process or provide intelligence to overseas governments. The problem is not that this law was passed. The problem is that the first case has just been recently registered under this new act. That is on 5th November 2020. A 65-year-old man has been charged under the provisions of this particular act, although the identity is still secret, but local media reports suggest that this man is of Chinese origin. Now, in 2020, things went really out of control when Australia openly called for an independent inquiry into origins of novel coronavirus. And Australia went as far as to raise doubts over initial handling of COVID outbreak by China, and that was the tipping point. That was the instance from where Chinese government started to publicly take up the declining relationship between Australia and China. And it's not like they have not responded. Of course they have, and they mainly deal with economic measures. For example, we know that Australia is mainly a supplier of agricultural products and raw primary products, and so that is where the China has an advantage. It banned the import of Australian meats and it imposed 80% tariff on barley, a major Australian export. And not just that, China effectively banned all coal imports from Australia, and it did not ban the future imports. Even the consignments which were on the way or on the ports, they were left stranded waiting for clearance for months, and that was just in the month of November. And then finally we know the 14-point dossier with which we started this whole discussion. So after these sets of economic kind of sanctions, Australia has not given up on actions against Chinese firms and Chinese governments, and two of them are very important and needs mention. There is something known as Five Eyes Alliance. It is an intelligence sharing alliance between Australia, New Zealand, Canada, UK and US. Now these set of 5 nations coordinate each other with matters related to intelligence sharing. And recently, that is in the month of November, they issued a joint statement expressing concern over deteriorating democratic situation in Hong Kong. Of course, everyone knew that that is not going to go down well with Chinese Communist Party. And that's what happened. In response to this, official government statement of China said no matter if they have 5 eyes or 10 eyes, if they dare to harm China's sovereignty, security and development interests, they should be aware of their eyes being poked and blinded. And then finally, just 2 days ago, Australian lawmakers have passed a law. This law gives powers to federal government to veto any agreement with foreign state, whether it is by a state government or by a company. Now, the question arises why federal government had to pass this law. Now we know that Australia is quite a strong federal nation and states have power to act independently of the central or the federal government. So the Victorian state and its state government was quite active in collaborating with Chinese government, especially in their Belt and Road Initiative. And this was not going down well with the other states as well as the federal government. When the federal government insisted that the state government cancel these contracts given to Chinese companies, the state government declined. And so that is why the Australian lawmakers passed a law giving wide powers to federal government to cancel such contracts being independently entered by the state governments with foreign countries. Of course, everyone knows that this is meant to counter the Chinese companies. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that China and Australia are going to become adversaries just like India and China or US and China? Of course, it is quite difficult to predict the future, but there are important things which you should keep in mind. Australia is heavily dependent on China, especially in matters of trade, which has rapidly grown over the years. If you look at China's lion's share in the trade with Australia, 39% of the Australian exports go to China. And similarly, 27% of import into Australia come from China. And so, it is difficult to think of any other country which can absorb or which has the capacity or the appetite to absorb such large scale dairy, meat, coal and other natural resources as China has. And apart from that, recently they have concluded RCEP, on which lies high hopes of Australian government. Any further deterioration in the relationship between China and Australia is going to threaten RCEP. So from the perspective of mains examination, an important question is whether China is really antagonizing the regional powers or not. And so when you have to write pointers, with Australia, you can write any 3 points out of those, especially Australian law to counter foreign firms, passage of foreign interference law, blacklisting of Huawei and ZTE. Similarly, steps taken by India, Japan and US have been discussed in our DNS. So you have to combine all of them to indicate that how China has ruffled the feathers with important regional and international players. Let's now move on to the next discussion. Challenges in achieving herd immunity through vaccination. This article appears on page number 11, which is the Science and Technology page, and dwells into question of vaccination in India. We all know that the central government has already clarified about universal vaccination against COVID-19 pandemic. On various occasions, statements have emanated from various government authorities suggesting that vaccination, especially in initial phases, will be all about vaccinating a critical mass of people, which will eventually break the virus transmission. Government has stated that by immunizing a critical mass, we will achieve herd immunity. So in this regard, we will first understand the concept of herd immunity, and then we will delve into various issues arising out of selective vaccination. Some of them also deals with ethical concerns. So let us now begin the discussion. Now, since everyone is talking about herd immunity, let us just quickly go over to this concept. But before that, let us understand what immunity is. So in biology, immunity is the capability of an organism to resist harmful microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, and many others. It is believed that once a person is infected, they develop an immunity against that. Of course, it might not be lifelong, but it provides resistance for some time to come. What happens when a novel pathogen or a new virus like coronavirus comes into the scene? Since it is a novel virus or a new virus, there is no resistance or no immunity against it. And hence the virus quickly spreads across the community. And so we have a demonstration for you on your screen. On the left hand side, you see that if no one is immune in a particular population against a coronavirus or any other new virus, the infection goes on unabated without any control because there is no antibody in anyone. And so, if an infected person meets with 4 people, he or she ends up infecting most of them. But this gradually leads to a condition where around 50 to 60% of the people in a particular population are infected with that particular virus or bacteria. When most of a population is immune to an infectious disease, this provides an indirect protection of herd immunity, even to those people who are not immune to the disease. So, if I do not have antibody against a particular virus, but I live in a society where most people are immune, I don't need to worry. For example, if 80% of people are immune to a virus, 4 out of every 5 people who encounter someone with the disease won't get sick, as you can see on the right hand side of the demonstration. In this way, the spread of infectious disease is kept under control. And depending on how contagious an infection is, usually 50 to 80% of the population needs immunity to achieve herd immunity. And that is what Dr. Harshvardhan says, that merely infecting 30 to 40% of the people in a society is not a criteria for herd immunity, and it depends on the virus. Now the question arises, how do we achieve herd immunity? And there are 2 ways to achieve that. Either more and more number of people get infected with the virus and achieve immunity, or with the development of vaccine, we vaccinate enough number of people in the society so that they get antibodies. And you should keep in mind that vaccination is a way to achieve herd immunity. So this is a very simple concept of herd immunity which needs to be kept in mind. So of course, now it is clear that government is going to adopt the vaccination route to herd immunity. But there are problems in this thinking. First, no one knows as to what will be the actual or the approximate level of immunization needed for herd immunity. No one can say as of right now with certainty that whether 60%, 70%, 80% or even 90% will be sufficient to stop the spread of COVID-19. Because the transmission of COVID-19 is quite uneven and it is very difficult to predict. The levels of immunization needed for herd immunity is basically determined by how virus spreads in the population and makes assumption that the spread is homogeneous, but that is countered by the uneven transmission of COVID-19 as we have seen. This is the reason why there have been a number of super spreading events where some infected individual spread the virus to a very large number of people, while most infected individuals transmit the virus to only one or even none. So the virus is itself very unpredictable, and so it is difficult to predict that how many people will need to be immunized in order to achieve the herd immunity. Moving on to the next point, which is about the efficacy of the vaccines themselves. Clinical trials run over a period of 2 to 3 months, over which they judge efficacy as well as safety of the vaccine. And so as of now, it is quite unclear as to what will be the duration of protection offered by these vaccines. Also, the frequency of vaccination is unknown. So let's say the government decides on any ratio or any percentage of the population which needs to be vaccinated. But if the duration of protection induced by the vaccine is just, let's say, 3 months, which means that after 3 months, the antibodies induced due to these vaccines disappear, then the achievement of herd immunity is unthinkable, because then all those vaccinated would again be prone to the infection. Then the next question comes as to who will be the people who will get the vaccines. Of course, it makes sense to first administer the vaccines to high priority groups. Basically, the frontline workers, medical professionals, police personnel, people doing jobs in essential services. That is fine. But once that section of population is done, who will be the next? And this is quite easy if you take any other disease. For example, let's take HIV, and let's say that we develop a vaccine against HIV. And so if we have to select people, of course we have a priority list. For example, intravenous drug takers, sex workers, people undergoing frequent blood transfusions. So that priority list is clear. But in case of COVID, since it can impact and affect anyone, there needs to be a clear-cut, objective and transparent method through which government is going to identify the people who will get these vaccines after these high priority groups are done. Then the next important question is, what about who are already infected? They are infected, which means that they have antibodies for at least some time to come. But just like vaccine, these antibodies can disappear within few months, and so they will again be vulnerable just like anyone else. And so the question arises, will they be excluded for some time? And then finally, a perennial problem of any vaccination program, sections of population hesitant towards any kind of vaccination. Now, if a large section of our society does not get vaccinated, even if it is made available to them, then COVID is obviously going to become some kind of an endemic problem, just like dengue or chikungunya. And so, is it not the right time for the government to make it mandatory for everyone, especially their children, to get vaccinated against COVID-19? Now, you should understand that vaccinating children is quite easy, because anyways they have to go through multiple vaccination sessions, and COVID vaccine could be just another add-on to it. And so the government should actually think of making COVID vaccine mandatory at that stage as well. So this was an important article delving into the concept of herd immunity and the challenges which the current approach of the government is going to pose in front of the policymakers. Let us now move on to the next discussion. So the next article which we have taken up appears on page number 11, that is Science and Technology page. Keeping Secrets in a Quantum World and Going Beyond. This particular article dwells into the challenges posed by the quantum computing, especially with respect to encryption technologies or cryptography. And so in this respect, it is important for us to understand how ordinary computers work and what exactly is quantum computing and how it improves the overall scenario as far as computing and its applications are concerned. So any discussion about understanding quantum computing has to first start by understanding how ordinary computers work. So we all know that ordinary computers use chips, and these chips are based on bits. So these are like tiny switches that can either be in an off position or in an on position. Or in the terms of binaries, we call them the values of 0 or 1. So in simple words, any output from a computing device can either take 0 form or take 1 form. And these combinations of zeros and ones are used in all the calculations of the computers which we are using today. Every app you use, website you visit, and photograph you take is ultimately made up of millions of these bits in some or the other combinations of 0, 1. Now this works great for most things, but it absolutely does not reflect the way universe actually works. Because in nature, things are not just either off or on. There are a lot of uncertainties in our universe. And even best of the supercomputers are not well suited in dealing with these uncertainties because they are simply based on a principle of certainty, either 0 or 1. And so that is why even most powerful computers fail at simulating, let's say, a molecule of protein or reactions. Most of the supercomputers even now find it difficult to forecast weather or predict the share market or other financial instruments. And that is where the role of quantum computing comes into play. In case of quantum computing, instead of bits, we have qubits. And a special quality of qubits is that rather than just being on or off, qubits can also be in what's called superposition, which means they can assume the state where they are both on or off at the same time, or they could be in a spectrum somewhere in between. I understand that this is quite a difficult concept to understand, and so let us try to understand this with another example. Take a coin. If you flip it, it can either be heads or tails. And so that is bits, either heads or tails as it falls on the ground, and that is ordinary computers, classical computers. But if you spin the coin, it's got a chance of landing on heads and a chance of landing on tails until you measure it. So until you stop the coin, it can be either. And it's very difficult to actually tell which of the sides, whether it is heads or tails, is facing you. And this is what is called superposition. And that is what gives the power to the quantum computers. And so if you ask a normal computer to figure its way out of a maze, it will try every single branch in turn, ruling them all out individually until it finds the right one. Whereas if you see quantum computer, it can go down every path of the maze all at once simply because of superposition, and that is why it is much faster and more efficient. Then apart from superposition, there is another important aspect which is called entanglement. And to understand entanglement, again we will take the example of coins. If you flip two coins, the result of one coin toss has no bearing on the result of the other one. They are independent. But in entanglement, the two phenomena are linked with each other, even though they could be physically separate. And this can also be easily done with the help of quantum computing, because it allows for much more number of combinations rather than just 2, 0 and 1. And so that brings us to what advantages shall be arrived at by applying quantum computing in various day-to-day and scientific developments. Starting with medicine. First and foremost, it is going to drastically change the way we simulate molecules in the computers. Right now, what traditional computers and even supercomputers find it difficult to actually simulate, or you can say emulate, the exact structure of complicated molecules like proteins, DNA structures, RNA structures. But with quantum computers, we can create, simulate and model molecular structures quite easily and in a much efficient way. Then the next direct advantage of application of quantum computing is in the development of drug. You need to understand that usually drugs are being developed via trial and error method, which is not only very expensive, but also a risky and challenging task to complete. Now what quantum computing is going to do is that it is going to enable pharmaceutical and material science companies to develop methods to analyze large-scale molecules, multiple reactions and chain reactions simultaneously, and companies can run hundreds of millions of comparisons within a fraction of seconds. Then we understood that how quantum computing is specially adept at dealing with predictions and forecasts because it thrives into uncertainty. And so, one of the best applications which various companies have already started to explore is that of predicting the financial markets. For a finance industry to find the right mix for right kind of investment based on expected returns are very, very important to survive in the market. Now, by applying quantum technology to perform these massive and complex calculations, companies can not only improve the quality of the solutions, but also reduce the time to develop them. Similar is the case with weather forecast and disaster management. You know that currently, the process of analyzing weather conditions by traditional computers can sometimes take longer than the weather phenomena itself, and so it defeats the whole purpose. But a quantum computer's ability to crunch vast amounts of data in a very short period of time will drastically enhance the forecasting methods and hence will allow corrective measures to be taken at right time. Then the next set of application is in logistics management or logistics optimization. So improved data analysis and robust modeling will indeed enable a wide range of industries to optimize their logistics and scheduling workflows associated with their supply chain management, which is a very, very difficult task to achieve using currently available ordinary computers. For example, the current models need to continuously calculate and recalculate optimal routes of traffic management or fleet operations or air traffic control, and with the current available computational techniques which we have, it takes a lot of time for the results to be fed into the loop so that it improves again. It is expected that the application of quantum computing would bring drastic improvements in logistic optimization. And finally, cryptography, which is also the topic for which the article appears in The Hindu today. Now, the article today in The Hindu says that how the traditional methods of encryption, which we use currently, can be rendered useless by the application of quantum computing. Because we know that quantum computing is much faster, it takes into account a lot of uncertainties, and so in order to intercept and to break the code of conversation between, let's say, two people doing chats on WhatsApp, traditional computing can take years to break the code, but quantum computing can do that in splits of seconds. And so it expresses concerns in this regard. But if quantum computing can be used to break the traditional encryption methods, we can also design new encryption methods based on quantum computing. Out of all the applications concerned, quantum cryptography is something which is most explored, and the density of research going on in the field of quantum cryptography is the highest as compared to other applications. So in this regard, it is important for us to have a clear-cut idea as to how ordinary computers work, how quantum computing is different from ordinary computers, what is the principle of superposition and entanglement, and then finally what are the important applications of quantum computing in present context. Let us now move on to the next discussion. Islamic multilateralism with internal fissures appears on page number 13. This article dwells into the functioning of OIC, or Organization of Islamic Cooperation, especially with matters related to Kashmir, because often OIC has issued official statements criticizing India's actions in the state of Kashmir. So in this context, we'll first understand the backdrop behind the formation of OIC. Then we will go on and understand the membership of OIC, and then finally what are the current challenges because of which OIC is not able to function like a cohesive organization. So the idea of OIC was born in 1969. The Arab states had already been defeated by Israel in Six-Day War in 1967, which also led to the loss of East Jerusalem, which includes Al-Aqsa Mosque, one of the three holiest shrines in Islam after Makkah and Medina. So it was felt that one of the holiest places of Islam has been lost from their own control and has gone into the control of the Jewish. And so a need was felt to form an organization which could take care of the interest of Muslims across the world. And hence, a Rabat conference was organized. Rabat is located in Morocco, and when this conference was organized, it was decided that there would be two conditions for a state to become a member of OIC. First, that the country should be majority Muslim, and the head of the state of the country should also necessarily be Muslim. Of course, that condition has been waived off, and a lot of countries are now members which do not have Muslim heads. And so the OIC's mission statement was to become a collective voice of the Muslim world that works to protect the interest of Muslim world. Let us now look at the membership of OIC. Currently it has 57 states, and an important feature is that 56 of them are also the members of United Nations, barring Palestine. So Palestine is a member of OIC, and it is important to keep in mind because not many organizations give memberships to Palestine. Most of its member states are Muslim majority countries, but not all, as we have already discussed. Now, the 22 members of Arab League are also part of OIC, but there are other significant Muslim countries, for example, Turkey, Iran, Pakistan, Indonesia, Malaysia, North African countries, and there are countries from South America as well. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. Now the question arises that there are so many issues facing the Muslim world, why OIC is not able to act as a platform to redress these issues. And the reasons lie within the members themselves, starting with Israel. Muslim states are not able to put pressure on US to reign in Israel, especially on matters dealing with Palestine. Also, we have seen how in past 2 to 3 years, Saudi, UAE and various other Muslim countries have grown increasingly closer to Israel on the verge of establishing diplomatic relationship. And this has not gone down well with other Muslim countries. Also, we know long-standing conflict between Sunni majority Saudi Arabia and Shia majority Iran. Not only are they fighting a lot of proxy wars, for example in Yemen, but it also gets reflected in the functioning of OIC. Then, under the leadership of Mr. Erdogan, Turkey has started to assert itself as a leader of Islamic world. Erdogan wants to take Turkey to the heights of Ottoman Empire, which is obviously threatening to Saudi Arabia, which is by default a de facto leader of Muslim world since last 3 to 4 decades. This increasing assertion of Islamic identity by Turkey has also ruffled feathers within OIC. And so that is why, although the statements released by OIC under the pressure of Pakistan bring the Kashmir issue to limelight for a short while, but it does not mean anything in international relations. The honey industry and its bittersweet reality appears on page number 12. So the Center for Science and Environment last week released results of an investigation it had conducted into the quality of honey being produced in India. And it reported that products by many popular brands were not honey, and in fact had been spiked significantly with sugar. And so, the Center for Science and Environment has recommended that they should not be branded and sold as honey. Now, there is no trick or tip one can try at home to check if the honey is adulterated or not. Only nuclear magnetic resonance or NMR test would reveal if the honey is adulterated or not. However, NMR test is not required by Indian law for honey, but it is mandatory for exports in many countries. So in this regard, we'll first understand the criteria for testing of honey, although it is not very important, but just to get an idea. But what is important is the ingredients and benefits of honey, and then we will move on into the laws against food adulteration in India. So when the honey is tested, what is actually tested is the ratio of sugars. There are certain acceptable ratios of sugar, which is categorized into fructose, glucose, and sucrose. Then tolerance limit of ash content and hydroxymethyl furfuryl, which is the component formed once the honey is heated. It is important to know that MHF is actually quite toxic for bees. And then the honey is also tested for the sugar from corn, sugarcane, or rice. Now, from the perspective of prelims examination, it is important to understand the benefits of honey, starting with its sweetness. Honey is primarily a complex of fructose, glucose, and sucrose sugars. It has relatively high fructose content, which is why it is sweeter than commercial sugar, which is heavier on sucrose. Higher fructose content makes it sweeter than sugar, which is high on sucrose. Since it is high on fructose, which is easier to break down, and that is why it is easier to digest honey. Then, apart from this, it also has medicinal value. The enzymes that bees use to make honey out of plant nectar leave it quite rich in antioxidants, amino acids, and other products that give honey its medicinal properties. This is why honey is a part of traditional medicine and has been promoted as an immune system stimulant, particularly during COVID-19 pandemic. When the honey is adulterated with sugar, or the addition of artificial sugar syrups reduces the concentration of these enzymes per gram of honey, reducing the impact of honey on our immune system. Apart from that, honey is also power-packed with minerals and vitamins. Honey contains minerals like iron, zinc, potassium, calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, and selenium. Whereas if you talk about important or vital vitamins, it contains B6, thiamine, riboflavin, pantothenic acid, and niacin. So regular consumption of pure honey or unadulterated honey will obviate the need for any kind of multivitamins. And this could also be the reason why the loved ones are often referred to as honey. Now, since this news related to adulteration has come, it is important for us to actually go into the laws against food adulteration in India. And there are 3 such provisions. One is Food Safety and Standards Act 2006, Indian Penal Code 1860, and Consumer Protection Act 2019. So, starting with the act which directly dwells into adulteration, which was enacted in 2006. Government enacted the Food Security and Standard Act, which repealed all other laws governing food quality in India at that time. The act empowered the central government to frame rules under the act to deal with several aspects with respect to the regulation of food safety. First and foremost, it established an authority, which is Food Safety and Standard Authority of India, to supervise and regulate food safety and standards. Then it empowered the state government to appoint Commissioner of Food Safety for the state for actually implementing the provisions of the act. And then various steps have been taken by FSSAI established under this act to check food adulteration. For example, it has set up Detect Adulteration with Rapid Test or DART, which is an online platform for checking quality of various food articles. Then section 272 and 273 of IPC deal into adulteration, which has made it a punishable offense to sell food or drink which is adulterated. And then finally, Consumer Protection Act provides for punishment by a competent court for the manufacture or sale of adulterated or spurious goods. Now, FSSAI has already come out with revised standards of honey, and it has recognized that adulteration of honey with added sugar is a global problem. And in the regulations, the tolerable limits of impurities that must be detected have been published. Now it is time for FSSAI to pick up these brands from the shelves of the shops and conduct the testing just like Center for Science and Environment has done in order to save people from the worst consequence of eating direct sugar.